Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahawashi, Bahasham, Rakahakwadash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 50. Salakia. And as the header reads, prophesy against Babylon. And Jeremiah 50 is talking about two Babylons, the ancient Neo-Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar, and the modern-day spiritual Babylon, Babylon the Great, the virgin daughter of Babylon, that whore that sits upon many waters and rides upon the beast in Revelation chapter 17, which is the United States of America. But I'm going to jump down to verse 12. Your mother shall be sore confounded. She that bare you shall be ashamed. And who is the mother of the United States of America? Great Britain, because the 13 colonies came out of Great Britain and, became what is known as the United States of America today. Behold, the hindermost of the nations, at the ends of the earth. And when those European colonizers came to the Western Hemisphere, what did they call it? The New World, the uncharted territory, the ends of the earth. The hindermost of the nations shall be a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert. And that's because the United States of America during World War III is going to be hit by 200 million nuclear missiles, which is going to turn it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards. And it's not just going to be America's enemies like Russia or China that are going to shoot nukes onto her. America's own allies, her European allies, her mother, they are going to turn against her at some point during World War III and join in shooting missiles on this whore. And I opened up this video with this verse to preface a clip from GBN News' YouTube channel. And I believe that stands for, Great Britain News. But the title reads, UK, the United Kingdom, needs to say hell with the U.S. after the way we've been treated, argues Afghanistan veteran. As we're going to see in this clip, this British veteran, or, United Kingdom veteran, because, the United Kingdom's made up of Britain, Scotland, Ireland, etc., but the head of that island is what? Great Britain. But that veteran of the war in Afghanistan says, hey, the UK needs to say to hell with the US, and we need to chart our own path, because look at how bad the US screwed us over during the war in Afghanistan by pulling out without letting her allies know. And look at all the blood, sweat, and tears we got for following the United States into the war in Afghanistan. And hey, this may just be a low-level soldier, but best believe a lot of people over in the UK have this sentiment. And as we just read back in Jeremiah 50, verse 12, your mother that bare you shall be ashamed and sore confounded. It's going to culminate in America's mother, casting her off like the whore she is. And those nuclear missiles hitting this whore and cleansing her of all this filth and vileness and spiritual STDs that she's been spreading to these other nations on the planet. But this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this clip, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. It is simply for educational purposes.
But today, believe it or not, marks 2 years from Britain's withdrawal from Afghanistan following NATO's 20 years in the country.
Well, dozens of countries evacuated their forces from the country after the Taliban retook the capital, Kabul.
Well, let's talk to Veterans campaigner Trevor Coult, who fought in Afghanistan. Good to see you this morning, Trevor. I mean, it was such a disheartening thing when that withdrawal took place. I mean, particularly for a lot of the veterans and the families of those who died in Afghanistan, just to see us walk away. I mean, where do you think we are 2 years on?
We're nowhere really, Stephen and Ellie. We went backwards. You have to remember that we were invited. We were invited by the president of Afghanistan to come over and help him defeat the Taliban at the start. So we went there to help them out, and in the end, we handed it back to them. Now, while we were in Afghanistan, I can assure you that every single person that we caught, we had captured, that had killed British soldiers, who had killed our allies, never got prosecuted anyway. The Afghan authorities did not recognise biometrics. They didn't recognise iris scans and fingerprints. So even though we had all the proper things put down to put these people in jail for years, every time they went through the Afghan authorities, they were released. So I hate to say it, but I lost some good friends out there. But I do sort of think it was a complete waste of time. We've lost so many people out there, and for what?
And what do you think when you look back at the extraction, the international withdrawal from Afghanistan? I mean, most would agree that it was an absolute disaster in terms of planning and in terms of execution. We're just seeing some videos there of the desperate people trying to scale the walls of Kabul airport. We all remember those scenes, don't we? And people desperately clinging to aircraft trying to take off. What are your reflections now about the actual withdrawal?
Well, let's be honest, was it 13 or 14 US Marines were killed during the extraction? And that was all down to the President of the United States, who actually did an underhand deal with the Taliban and didn't actually tell any of his allies. And we're meant to be his best ally. Oh, the UK, we're like that. No, it was a complete cluster. I won't use the other word, but he destroyed it. I've never known in my whole time for a country to keep a secret and not tell its friends and allies, we're about to leave, don't tell the British. Do you know what I mean? It was a disgrace. And if I'm honest, I said...
That's the United States of America for you, screwing over her allies, even her fellow Edomite allies. You had that devil Henry Kissinger say that America doesn't have friends, but well, pretty much friends of convenience. You're friends with America only when America needs you. And then once America's done with you, hey, they throw you under the bus quickly. Look at Vietnam, look at Afghanistan. Just go all throughout the history of the United States of America. Even Iraq. The Iraqi government under Saddam Hussein was friends with the U.S. back in the 80s when they had the Iraq-Iran war. But then when Saddam Hussein wanted to get away from the influence of the Western powers, looking for a currency, alternative, what happened? He was demonized as a evil dictator. We got to bring democracy and women's rights. And look at Iraq today, just like Afghanistan. Henry Kissinger also said it's dangerous to be America's enemy, roughly paraphrasing, but it's deadly to be America's friend. But let's go to Daniel chapter 7. I'm going to start at verse 19. And this is speaking of the fourth beast in that statue of a man made of different metals that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream and that the prophet Daniel broke down, which dealt with the different heathen kingdoms that would be ruling before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven under the children of Israel, known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. And those legs of iron were speaking of the ancient, pagan, Edomite Roman Empire. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, and what made Rome different. They didn't have a king. They had a senate house with senators who came up with the laws, and they had a consul and a proconsul, which would be your modern day or your ancient equivalent of a president and vice president. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. Verse 20, and the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up. Now we're coming into the last leg of that fourth beast in Daniel chapter 2. Those iron toes mixed with miry clay. The reincarnated Roman Empire, which is the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of. And the U.S. is that little horn that came up. And this all began, around the time of the Renaissance, when these Edomites came out of 1,000 years of being captives during the Dark Ages unto their rebirth to create this system you see today, the Western world, the rebirth of the Roman Empire. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, that little horn, the United States of America, and before whom 3 fell, the major powers in the so-called New World, or the Americas, before America took over completely, beginning with the 13 colonies. And those 3 that fell was Great Britain, which what did you have? The Revolutionary War. You had France. You had the French and Indian War. And then you also had Napoleon, in order to generate more money for his campaigns in Europe, had the Louisiana Purchase, which sold the rest of France's holdings in the Americas to the United States government. And then you had Spain, which you had the Spanish-American War. And before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things. And the United States of America is everything completely contrary to the laws, statutes, and commandments in the scriptures. They say they're a God-fearing nation, but they push atheism, so-called evolution, and the scientific method. And we can't forget the alphabet group beginning with LG, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And I want to get that word stout in the Strongs, which is H7229, Rob.
Strong's H, 7229. Rav.
But let's go to the outline of biblical usage. Great, great, figurative of power, the captain, the chief. And though they like to show it as a alliance of nations, who is at the head of NATO? The United States of America. They're the ones that fund most of the money for those European countries to upkeep their militaries. That's a major thing that President Trump complained about during his term in office, was how America's European allies in NATO, as well as the European Union, didn't want to pull their weight militarily or economically. But what I found interesting is in the Strong's info, it said captain, chief, great, lord, master, stout. And the United States of America definitely is the master who lords over her stout power over her European allies, whose look was more stout than his fellows, which is why President Joe Biden and the U.S. had no problems throwing her allies, such as Britain, under the bus when they pulled out of Afghanistan. And then look at this whole situation going on in Ukraine. You've got a lot of these European nations, especially Germany, that had heavy political and economic ties with Russia. But just because the U.S. wanted to, sanction and cut off Russia, and the U.S. continues to try to overthrow Russia, the U.S. bullied her European allies to put sanctions on Russia as well, and play ball in trying to cut Russia off from the rest of the world, which destroyed a lot of lucrative political and economic ties that these European nations had with Russia. Europe, as opposed to the U.S., much more heavily relies on Russian gas, natural gas, and oil and other resources. But now that Europe put a bad taste in Russia's mouth, Russia is saying, look, if you're going to be putting these sanctions on us and messing with us, we're going to stop sending you these resources, which in turn has led to issues in Europe, and Europe having to look to the United States for help. getting oil and natural gas from them, which is much more expensive, and putting them that much more in the hole. Hey, whose look was more stout than his fellows, which is one other reason and a whole host of reasons why America's own allies eventually are going to turn against her during World War III and ally themselves with Russia to shoot those 200 million nuclear missiles on this whore.
I said this to your producer yesterday. I don't understand why the UK works so closely with the US. I mean, I'm going to be honest, we have great intelligence, we have great soldiers, we have great abilities. We don't need them, and it's about time we stood on our own 2 feet and we said to hell with the US after the way it's treated us.
I mean, I guess the problem is when you look at something like Afghanistan.
Hey, whose look was more stout, the master or the lord over his fellows. That's why, the UK and a lot of these other European Edomite nations still follow under the US, because they're that whore that rides upon the beast, making all the final decisions at the end of the day.
That it's about the numbers, isn't it?
And what's even funny about that is that the masters of the US are what? Your elites, such as your Rothschilds, who are British. And we know, according to the scriptures, that London is the financial center of this beast system we're living in. It's just all a clusterfuck of these elites, hey, using the people of their fellow nation, the people of their own nation, their fellow Edomites, to screw each other over, screw the rest of the world over, so that they can remain in power.
We aren't strong
Just
enough.
to say real quick, I said London was the financial center. This is talking about those 3 unclean spirits like frogs in Revelation. You've got the United States of America, really the District of Columbia, which is its own government separate from the U.S. in Washington, D.C., which is the military arm of this beast system. You've got London, which is its own city in Britain. That's the financial aspect of this system. And then you've got the religious, spiritual aspect, the false prophet, the Pope over in Rome, Vatican City.
Are we, as an armed forces? Now, we know the armed forces numbers are so down at the moment, and resources and financial backing is low. I mean, it really needs to be lifted. We are in a position where we just can't operate on our own, can we?
Stephen, that's a great point, but we would be able to operate on our own if our peers in the House of Lords and our politicians would let us. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen our politicians deliberately dwindle away our armed forces in order to keep us in this new fancy European Union type military defense.
Hey.
So we deliberately...
Because a lot of those politicians at the top rub shoulders with the elites and are on board with their NW0 agenda. And right now that entails the UK continuing to follow in step with their other puppet, the United States of America.
Dwindle away our armed forces in order to keep us in this new fancy European Union type military defense. So we are deliberately dwindling away our armed forces. We are cutting away regiments still. I mean, thousands of regiments being cut away,
which is leading to America, or Babylon's mother, being sore confounded or ashamed of her. Hey, a lot of these, British Edomites and other Edomites in the UK. Perfect example right here with this veteran. See the issues with the UK continuing to have to follow after the US, and the situation's just going to continue to deteriorate to where, America's mother is going to turn against her and ally themselves with her enemies. But it was interesting what he just said about how he speculates that the politicians in the UK, keep the UK still being allies with the US because they're trying to hold together this fancy, European system. Hey, that last leg of the fourth beast, those iron toes mixed with miry clay, the NATO EU alliance. so-called Western world, which the U.S., that whore, is at the head of. Actually, let's go to Daniel chapter 2, which, like I was talking about earlier, this is the chapter that deals with that statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream of the different heathen kingdoms that would rule before the kingdom of heaven. And they labeled them for you so you know. That head of gold being the ancient Neo-Babylonian Empire, the arms and the breasts of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, the thigh and the legs, the thigh and the belly of brass, the Grecian Edomite kingdoms, and then those legs of iron, that fourth kingdom, the ancient pagan Edomite Roman Empire. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. And then, the ancient pagan Edomite Roman Empire fell. It split into two halves, the Western and then the Eastern Roman Empire, which was a continuation of it. And that's when the Israelites took over the Roman Empire, and what that morphed into the Byzantine Empire, and Israel ruling Europe during the Dark Ages. And then with the Renaissance, the rebirth, that's when Esau Edom began coming back into power and, subjugated the nation of Israel, sent them into slavery, and then brought back that beast whose deadly wound was healed, as it says in Revelation 13, into the system we see today, those iron toes mixed with miry clay. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, and that part of potter's clay are the weaker nations in this system, usually referred to as the pigs: Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And the part of iron, the stronger nations, the United States, Britain, Germany, and France. And it can also go into the part of iron being the military aspect, or NATO, and the part of clay, the weaker part, the economic part, the EU or European Union. Part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. And we can see constant internal issues going on with this system right now. We're seeing an example right now of that veteran of the Afghanistan war saying, look, it's more of a detriment to us to be allies with the U.S. To hell with the U.S. The U.K. should take its own path. And then what did you have a couple of years ago? Brexit, where, Britain left the European Union. And then due to this war in Ukraine, that's created more friction because, like I was saying earlier, the U.S. got its own allies to put themselves into a bad spot just to try to destroy Russia. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And we're coming into the end of this last leg of the fourth beast, to where these iron toes mixed with miry clay are going to be completely broken apart by nuclear missiles.
Amalgamated. Our own politicians are ruining our country.
Trevor, when you look at Afghanistan now as a country, especially when you think of women and young girls.
That's it with this clip. You get the point. But hey, there's friction going on between the United States of America and her allies. And as we've been going into in these precepts, it's ultimately going to culminate in the United States of America getting destroyed by not only her enemies during World War III, but her own allies. Let's get back into these precepts. This is the book of Obadiah. I'm going to start at verse 1 and jump around a bit. And the header reads, Edom will be humbled. And this whole chapter is dedicated to the punishment and downfall of you Edomites. The biblical Edomites today known as these so-called white people, these Americans, Canadians, Europeans, even the Russians, South Afrikaners, those little hats or 1948ers over in the Holy Land, etc., etc. The vision of Obadiah Thus saith the Lord Yahweh concerning Edom, we have heard a rumor from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. And I'm going to jump down to verse 7. All the men of thy confederacy, or your allies, have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. America's own European allies, doing deals behind her back with Russia and, hey, China as well, and America's other enemies, even though they like to put up that image that they're on one accord with the U.S. Is some recent examples. While, these European nations have put sanctions on Russia, and they're saying we're not taking any Russian natural gas or oil, there have been tankers that have been found going through those different oceans and sea lanes around Europe with their transponders turned off, and they found out that they were transporting Russian oil and natural gas to these European nations. And then a couple of months ago, you had France's president, Emmanuel Macron, say he expressed interest in, France having something to do with the BRICS nations. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread, they receive all this money, military assistance, and anything else from the United States of America, have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. America's own allies turning against her at some point during World War III to shoot those 200 million nuclear missiles onto the U.S. along with America's enemies. But let's go back to that Jeremiah chapter 50. 50 verse 12. Your mother, Britain, shall be sore confounded. She that bare you shall be ashamed. UK needs to say to hell with the US after the way we've been treated, argues Afghanistan veteran. Like I've been saying throughout the video, it may seem insignificant that just a lowly war veteran says it, but best believe a lot of people have that sentiment in that country towards the U.S. She that bare you shall be ashamed. Behold, the hindermost of the nations shall be a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert. Because of the wrath of Yahweh it shall not be inhabited, but it shall be wholly desolate. Everyone that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished and hiss at all her plagues. And what's going to make it uninhabitable and wholly desolate? Those nuclear missiles turning it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then a desolate, wholly uninhabitable wasteland afterwards, where man, woman, or child will never set foot on ever again, as it says later on in this chapter, but only desert creatures are going to dwell here after a time. And we know that this isn't talking about the ancient Neo-Babylonian Empire, which is in modern-day Iraq, because you've clearly got people there to this very day. Verse 14, put yourselves in array against Babylon round about. All ye that bend the bow, shoot at her. Spare no arrows, for she hath sinned against Yahweh. And those bows and arrows are symbolic for those nuclear missiles. The bows being the silos and other launch platforms, and the arrows being the missiles, because what do the arrows look like when they fly? What do missiles look like when they fly through the sky? Like arrows, and they make a whistling noise, like arrows make a whistling noise when they're flying through the sky. The prophets had to describe these visions the best way they could during their times as ancient weapons of war. But as it says, put yourselves in array against Babylon round about. And that's not just America's enemies, but America's own allies, which are going to turn against her. But now I'm going to close it out in Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, the 10 horns referring to the EU or European Union, beginning with the first 10 common markets of the EU, back when it was known as the European Economic Community, which Britain was a part of. And the beast is NATO. These shall hate the whore, the United States of America, that rides upon the beast and sits upon many waters or peoples, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire, that nuclear fire. So that's it with this video. With this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites, primarily from the United States of America, Babylon the Great, that whore. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babol, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.